Imagine ruling a kingdom for 3,000 years. Not a dynasty that flickered and faded, not a short-lived empire, but an entire civilization, stretching from the Stone Age to the Age of Rome, guided by one sacred figure, the Pharaoh. He was not just a king, he was believed to be a living god, the link between heaven and earth, the force that kept the universe in balance. And yet, every pharaoh fell. Some were erased from history, some were betrayed from within, some watched their divine authority collapse as foreign armies marched along the Nile. This is the true story of how the pharaohs rose to absolute power, ruled longer than any system in human history, and slowly, inevitably, fell. Around 3100 BCE, Egypt was not yet a single nation. It was divided into two lands, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. They had different rulers, different symbols, and a long history of rivalry. Then a king named Narmer emerged. Known later as Menes, Narmer did something no one before him had managed. He united the two lands into one kingdom. On the Narmer palette, one of the earliest historical records ever found, he is shown wearing both crowns, symbolizing total control. This moment did more than create a country, it created an idea that would define Egypt for the next 3,000 years. The ruler of Egypt was no longer just chosen by the gods, he was the god. From this moment on, the pharaoh was seen as Horus on earth, the guardian of Maat, the cosmic balance that kept the universe from descending into chaos. If the pharaoh ruled well, the Nile flooded, crops grew, and the people thrived. If he failed, disorder followed. Nature itself was believed to respond to the pharaoh's authority. Power, religion, and survival became inseparable. By around 2686 BCE, Egypt entered what historians now call the Old Kingdom. This was the age when pharaohs stopped thinking only about life and began obsessing over eternity. Pharaoh Djoser, guided by his brilliant architect Imhotep, ordered the construction of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It was the first massive stone monument in human history. It wasn't simply a tomb, it was a ladder to the heavens, a declaration that the pharaoh's soul would rise forever. Soon after came Khufu, who ruled around 2580 BCE and commissioned the Great Pyramid of Giza. Even today, it stands as a reminder of what centralized power can achieve. Built with mathematical precision and immense organization, the pyramid was not constructed by slaves, but by tens of thousands of skilled workers who believed they were serving a divine ruler. The pyramids were more than graves. They were proof that the pharaoh commanded labor, belief, and resources on a staggering scale. But this obsession with eternity drained the state. Wealth poured into tombs instead of towns. Local governors, known as nomarchs, grew powerful and independent. Slowly, the system cracked. By around 2181 BCE, the Old Kingdom collapsed. The Nile failed to flood properly, famine spread, civil order broke down. Egypt entered the First Intermediate Period, a time of chaos and division. For the first time, Egyptians faced a terrifying question. What if the pharaoh was not divine after all? What if the gods had turned away? After decades of instability, a ruler from Thebes named Mentuhotep II restored order around 2055 BCE. He reunited Egypt and revived faith in the throne, beginning the Middle Kingdom. This era marked a shift in how pharaohs ruled. They were still seen as divine, but they were now expected to govern more responsibly. Kings focused on irrigation, trade, and law. Egypt expanded south into Nubia, securing vital gold mines. Literature flourished, revealing a more human side of kingship. The pharaoh was no longer distant and untouchable. He was a shepherd of his people. But once again, Egypt's stability proved fragile. Around 1650 BCE, foreign rulers known as the Hyksos entered the Nile Delta. They brought horses, chariots, and advanced weapons. Egypt, unprepared for this new kind of warfare, fell. The Hyksos ruled the north, and Egypt was humiliated. This humiliation ignited a transformation. Around 1550 BCE, a Theban ruler named Ahmose I drove the Hyksos out and founded the New Kingdom. Egypt emerged stronger, angrier, and more ambitious than ever before. This was Egypt's golden age. Pharaohs became warrior kings. The empire expanded deep into the Near East and Nubia. Wealth poured into temples and cities. One of the most remarkable rulers of this era was Hatshepsut, who began her reign around 1479 BCE. A woman in a world of male kings, she ruled not as a queen behind the scenes, but as Pharaoh herself. She wore the symbols of kingship, including the false beard, not as disguise, but as authority. Under her rule, Egypt prospered through trade rather than war. Temples rose, art flourished, stability returned. After her came Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. He led more than a dozen military campaigns and turned Egypt into a dominant imperial power. At this point, the pharaoh stood at the height of his authority, commanding armies, wealth, and belief. Then came a ruler who nearly destroyed everything. Around 1353 BCE, Amenhotep IV rejected Egypt's ancient gods. He renamed himself Akhenaten and declared Aten, the sun disk, as the one true god. Temples were closed, priests lost power, art became strange and intimate, portraying the royal family in unfamiliar ways. Akhenaten even abandoned the old capital and built a new city, Amarna, dedicated entirely to Aten. It was the first known attempt at monotheism in recorded history, and it failed. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt quickly reversed course. His young son, Tutankhamun, restored the old gods. Tutankhamun ruled briefly and died young, but his untouched tomb would later become the most famous pharaoh of all time. Akhenaten's name was erased from monuments. His revolution became a warning. The pharaoh ruled with the gods, not above them. If Egypt had one final giant, it was Ramses II. He ruled from 1279 to 1213 BCE, longer than almost any other pharaoh. He built temples across the land and carved his name into monuments of earlier kings, ensuring his legacy would dominate history. At the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, Ramesses fought one of the largest chariot battles ever recorded. The result was a stalemate, followed by the world's first known peace treaty. But after Ramesses II, the decline became impossible to ignore. Successors were weaker, corruption spread, resources thinned, foreign threats increased. The pharaohs still claimed divine authority, but belief alone could not hold the empire together. From around 1100 BCE onward, Egypt slipped into a long decline. Libyan rulers took power, Nubian kings ruled from the south, Assyrian armies invaded. In 525 BCE, Persia conquered Egypt outright. Pharaohs still existed, but they answered to foreign emperors. Then, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great entered Egypt and was welcomed as a liberator. After his death, Egypt fell under Greek rule, governed by the Ptolemaic dynasty. These rulers adopted Egyptian customs and titles, calling themselves pharaohs, but the world had changed. The last of them was Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was intelligent, strategic, and multilingual. She ruled with skill in a dangerous political landscape, but divine kingship no longer carried the power it once did. In 31 BCE, her forces were defeated by Octavian at the Battle of Actium. A year later, Cleopatra was dead, and Egypt became a Roman province. For the first time in 3,000 years, there was no pharaoh. The greatest irony is this: the pharaohs believed monuments would make them eternal. They built pyramids, temples, and statues meant to defy time. Yet it was not their power that survived. It was their stories, their ambition, their mistakes, their rise and their fall. The pharaohs ruled longer than any empire in human history, but even they could not escape time. No matter how divine a ruler claims to be, history always has the final